I'm Auntie Anna. Welcome to a vacation of the mind. Please leave your troubles and your cares and your worries and baggage. Today our destination is Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. Our tour guide will be a man who poses the question, is he mad or is he a genius? True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why, you say? You say I am mad? That disease has sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of the hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and earth. I heard many things in hell. How them am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, his eye. He had an eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissemination I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of the door and opened it. Oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon the bed. Ha! What would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not for the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than I did. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no, His room was as black as pitch with thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through the fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing on it steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening. The old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quiet still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lay down. He was still sitting in the bed listening, just as I had done night after night, hearkening to the dark watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he'd been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had, trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He'd been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is a mere cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he'd been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the imperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my hand and my head within the room. When I waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, steadily, until at length a simple, dim ray, like a thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinction, a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow of my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that darn spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon that eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant, and the old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you I am nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence of the old house, so strange a noise as it this excited me into uncontrollable terror, yet for some minutes longer I refrained, and stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder, and I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound could be heard by the neighbor. The old man's hour had come, and with a loud yell I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I had dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with the muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased, and the old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the floor of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha, ha, ha. And when I had made an end of these labors, it was only 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bells sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavidity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbors during the night. Suspicions of foul play had aroused information, had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I made the gentlemen welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I made them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my overconfidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat, and still they chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness. At length I found that the noise was not within my own ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. Much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased, and I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, But the noise rose over it all and continued and increased, and it grew louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard it not? Almighty God! No, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew, they were just making a mockery of my horror, and this thought, and this I think, but anything was better than this agony, anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear their hypocritical smiles no more. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder and louder and louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed, tear up the planks, here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Well, fellow travelers, we've reached the end of our vacation of the mind. Feel free to leave your worries, cares, and troubles and baggage. And if you liked it, please hit like. Leave a comment on whether you think, was he mad? Was he a genius? Or just anything that you would like to share.